Here's the thing about flexing. You always want the latest and greatest. Because, well, that's just the way things work. Otherwise, you're gonna be like French Montana, getting trolled by 50 Cent. But when it comes to driving luxurious Russian mob vehicles, does it really matter? At the end of the day, it's a box with a twin-turbo V8 with enough torque to make the earth go round. To most people, it all looks the same. Can you really tell the difference? Is a 2020 Mercedes-Benz G63 AMG worth almost double the price of a lightly used first-generation W463 G-Wagon? I'll find out today. Let's start with the old. First up, we have the 2016 Mercedes-Benz G63. This has a 5.5-liter twin-turbo V8, producing a robust 563 horsepower and a menacing 561 foot-pounds of torque. Taking this thing from 0 to 60 in 5.3 seconds. Not bad for a box. So by now, I'm assuming you guys already know the origin of this car. It was made for the German military. But then there was some genius guy who decided that we should have a road-going version. Thank you, genius guy, because I happen to love this car. Now, with that being said, I'm assuming you guys could figure out what this thing drives like. I mean, it is a military vehicle. So the ride is terrible, and the steering is all sorts of sloppy. But I think that's the beauty about this car. It makes you feel like you're in something cool. You could conquer the world in one of these things. While you're conquering the world, your enemies will definitely hear you rolling up on them because you can hear this thing from a mile away. It has a menacing noise. I mean, after all, it is an AMG. So with that being said, we all know that AMGs usually produce torque all the way down low in the RPM range. Same thing here. There's not much turbo lag, which is great. But there is a delay in shifting, and that's when you're utilizing the paddles. Now, it's kind of annoying if you're using the plus or minus. It takes like a second before the gear actually kicks in. This is a Mercedes Source 7-speed gearbox and not a ZF or any fancy dual clutch. The exterior of this car is something that we all love. But once you step inside, not the same story. I'm personally not a big fan of this interior. Granted, it's a little bit more traditional than the new one, but the pace it on screen, the random buttons, and this odd gear shifter Mercedes decided to put in here makes no sense to me. I prefer the traditional tall one they used to have in the older G-Wagons, but I guess it is what it is. Now let's check out the 2020 version and see what the big differences are. But first, we gotta hand it to the resident race car driver to see where this thing stacks up on our fast list. His old car is still quick. Unfortunately, it's limited to 130 miles per hour from the factory. Probably a good thing though, since it is a box. If you're curious about the acceleration times, check out the fast list to see where it's stacked up. Let's move on to the 2020 G63 now. This is the 2020 Mercedes-Benz G63. This has a 4-liter twin-turbo V8 producing 577 horsepower and 627 foot-pounds of torque, all matted to a 9-speed Mercedes-sourced gearbox. This thing does 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. Now, this is my personal G-Wagon, so I'm going to be as unbiased as possible while doing this comparison. So let's talk about the engine. Now, we know that it's down in displacement, but this car produces more power, makes a better noise, and is more responsive than the outgoing generation. But the gearbox is still suffering from that delay we talked about in the old G63, where you shift it up or down using the paddles, there's a 1-second delay before the gear actually changes. The only difference here is that now it's a 9-speed gearbox versus the old 7-speed. But it's still a Mercedes-sourced gearbox. There's no ZF or any of that dual clutch stuff here. We all love the exterior of this car, but step inside this new G63, it's a whole different ballgame. Now you get a full digital dash, a completely reworked interior. It's taller, wider, and longer, which is nice because in the old one you felt a bit cramped. Now, speaking of the interior bits, it doesn't feel as if Mercedes just went into their parts bin and slapped an interior together. This time you get brushed aluminum, carbon fiber, piano black accents here and there, Alcantara steering wheel. There's just a lot of things going on in here that are way different from the old one. Now, I know you guys must be wondering what this new G63 drives like. Well, all I can tell you is that there's a day and night difference. One, the suspension is super smooth, almost S-Class smooth, which is a huge compliment for this car. And then the steering. The steering now is confidence inspiring. The old one, you would have to think twice about taking a turn. One of my biggest pet peeves was that Mercedes did give the old G63 a sunroof, but they never gave it a moonroof. Now we got one. Mercedes did a great job with this thing, hands down, I'll tell you that. Because they brought this car into the 21st century versus the old one. Now, I know some people prefer the old one just because of its ruggedness, but to drive every day, this is the one to have. Now, we know that this G63 is obviously going to be faster than the old one, but since I'm still in my braking period, we're not going to be racing them today. So let's put them side by side and take a look at them. Both of these cars exude opulence. There's no doubt about that. And even though the body style of the first generation of the W463 G-Wagon remained virtually unchanged for almost 3 decades, the car itself is still relevant. Driving around on the road, I get plenty of attention in a car with a design that effectively debuted in the 1970s. The new car certainly improves on everything that could possibly be improved upon, inside and out. And no matter which way you look at it, the 2019 redesign was well worth the wait, and is in my opinion well worth the premium. On the other hand, the old one still holds a special place in my heart and appreciate it for what it is, and I am looking to pick up an older G-Wagon for nostalgic reasons. And if your goal is to use the G-Wagon as it was intended, and I mean being an off-road monster, I'd say go for the first gen and throw on some nice mud tires. It's still amazingly capable, and even though the interior is dated and rides kind of rough, that's what I would expect in a function over form vehicle. At the end of the day, there's a certain charm to both cars that can't be matched with any other vehicle on the road, short of maybe an H1 Alpha. But for my purposes, I think I'm gonna stick with the new one.
First time on the channel? Don't forget to check out some of my other stuff. I produce all sorts of cool content with performance cars and acceleration tests, so if that's your jam, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring that bell icon for new episodes every Thursday. Thanks for watching.